To be ready. His Excellency has arrived, and may I first ask Ruth Mackenzie, President of Volunteer Canada, to approach.
Hello, welcome to all of you. My name is Ruth Mackenzie, and I have the pleasure of being the President and CEO of Volunteer Canada, Bénévole Canada. Thank you for attending this special event in Canada's voluntary sector. Those of you who are volunteers and who work in volunteer-involving organizations make such a difference in the lives of Canadians everywhere. It is with great pleasure that I ask you all to rise as we welcome His Excellency, the Right Honourable David Johnston, Governor-General of Canada. Thank you very much. Please be seated. We are thrilled to have with us today some young volunteers from the Ottawa Children's Choir and their artistic director, Jackie Hawley. The Ottawa Children's Choir is dedicated to artistic excellence, community connections, and above all, the joy of singing. It provides unique music education and training for children ages 9 to 16 through study, rehearsal, and performance of the finest choral repertoire. The choir has performed locally with the National Arts Centre Orchestra, the Ottawa Symphony Orchestra, Opera Lyra, the Ottawa Choral Society, Chœur Classique de l'Outaouais, and the Cantata Singers of Ottawa. The OCC also joins choirs from across Canada to sing annually on Canada Day at Unisong. Please stand for the national anthem, and I encourage you to sing along with these exceptionally talented young volunteers. Thank you so much for that beautiful rendition of O Canada. You are a talented group of young people, clearly, and I didn't sing because my microphone was on. And that would not be a pleasant experience for you in the room. I would now like to introduce you to our panelists who are joined by His Excellency on stage today. To my far left is our volunteer representing youth, Lynn Lessard. Lynn is a 20-year-old student from the University of Ottawa who has a reputation for being a superstar volunteer, donating many hours of her time to volunteer projects she's personally interested in. Lynn works for the University of Ottawa Community Service Learning Centre and also volunteers in a leadership capacity on committees and works to motivate others to volunteer. Lynn was Volunteer Ottawa's youth team leader for Change the World, the Ontario Youth Volunteer Challenge, and one of her current volunteer priorities is lending her talents to a program that encourages more women to enter politics. Beside Lynn and representing employer-supported volunteers is Dave Muir, an employee with Manulife Financial in Waterloo. Dave dedicates himself to a variety of volunteer causes and inspires many others to get involved as well. He is also the 2009 recipient of a prestigious Manulife Award, the Dominic D'Alessandro Community Award, presented to employees for exemplary community leadership. To His Excellency's left is John Hagerman and his 11-year-old daughter, Brooke Hagerman. They are here representing Canadian families who volunteer together. John and his children and his wife signed on for a 3-year commitment to live as one of the volunteer resident families at Wapoos Family Farm. Wapoos provides retreats in a rural setting for economically disadvantaged families as well as families with a disabled child. Representing volunteers from the baby boomer generation, Omaima Ferris immigrated to Canada from Egypt with her parents at the age of 4. The recipient of several awards for her volunteer achievement, including a Canadian Leadership Award, she has also made the voluntary sector her career. Currently, she coordinates the volunteer program at the Ottawa Community Immigrant Services Organization, where she recruits, screens, and trains hundreds of volunteers. Welcome to our dedicated and exemplary panelists. As the saying goes, to the world, you may be one person, but to one person, you may be the world. In his brief investiture as Canada's Governor-General, His Excellency has already received thousands of invitations to meet with Canadians from all walks of life and from organizations across the country. Canada's voluntary sector could not be prouder than to have His Excellency here with us today to recognize the importance of the work volunteers do. At his investiture, His Excellency was described as representing the best of Canada: hard work, dedication, public service, and humility. What tremendous virtues each of these qualities is, but to possess them all in one human being is extraordinary. Therefore, it is with great honor that I call on His Excellency, the Right Honourable David Johnston.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Distinguished volunteers, ladies and gentlemen. I love that introduction, Ruth, especially the word humility. I'm reminded of that famous remark that Churchill once made when someone said about his successor as the Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, Mr. Attlee is a very humble man, and he said, Mr. Attlee has a lot to be humble about. If everything attributed by Churchill were in fact said by Churchill, he'd still be alive. I feel very much at home here. The very first event in which I participated as Governor General was here in this marvelous room on October 2nd after the investiture. And after it was over, Maureen sent me an abject note of apology, thinking it was such a disaster. Now, that was not apropos of my remarks. It was the fact that as I was being introduced by an old friend who introduced one as only old buddies introduce old buddies in the warmest of terms, just before he finished, the fire alarm went off. And we all trooped out, Maureen, stood outside for half an hour, and then we came back in. And I got to tell you, I sent her a reply to her letter of apology of admiration and congratulations, because she gave me such a wonderful line. We came back in, and Bob Page finished the introduction, and I came to the microphone and said, you know, I've been a university president for 26 years, and I'm very accustomed to the audience disappearing during the course of my speech. You've got it. This is the first time I've managed to empty the entire auditorium even before I've spoken. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. I'm thrilled, as you know. And I want to express my sincerest gratitude to all of those who've gathered here, especially these panelists, to discuss the changing landscape for volunteerism in Canada. I also want to thank Volunteer Canada and Ruth Mackenzie and her wonderful colleagues and organization for the important research on the volunteer experience in this country, research that has been sponsored by that great Canadian corporate citizen, Manulife, and how wonderful it is to have a colleague, Dave, here, who carries the Dominic D'Alessandro Award, another outstanding Canadian who has done so much for our country. Before we begin, let me take a moment to look back at where we've been. Canadians have a truly remarkable history of volunteerism, both at home and abroad. Early Canadians fully understood the extent of their dependence upon one another. A story I love to tell is the first governor of this land, Samuel de Champlain, said that his pioneering settlement at Port Royal would not have survived its first winter in 1605 were it not for the generous help of the local First Nations. That's very true. They would have died of scurvy, or the equivalent of that in those days, but the native people around Port Royal shared their fresh meat with those inhabitants and permitted them to survive. And the same thing happened subsequent year in Quebec. It was the sharing of those First Nations people with those original settlers that permitted them to survive and therefore permitted the precedent of permanent settlement to occur in Canada. Later, of course, the mostly rural inhabitants of our young country helped each other as they built barns and communities in the hopes of a better life for their children. I still see examples of this as neighbors combine their diverse talents and energies to help their communities in time of need. Our home is in Waterloo County. We live on a Mennonite farm, and I use the metaphor of barn raising quite constantly because it is in the DNA. It's part of the history of our Mennonite neighbors. They come to help one another. In fact, Sharon, my wife, runs a stable operation on the farm, 30 horses, and we'd only be there in a year or so, and the insurance rates had gone up, and she was very concerned about higher premiums. How do you get the budget to break even? So she was re-estimating the value to replace each of our buildings, and Edgar Shantz, the farmer, Mennonite farmer that does the farming on our farm, was there. And she said, Edgar, I got a value of $20,000 on this drive shed. Is this appropriate value? He says, why are you putting a value? Well, she said, for insurance. He says, why are you insuring it? She said, well, Edgar, if it burned down, we'd have to rebuild it. He said, if it burned down, we'd help to rebuild it. Neighbors coming as barn raisers. Today, in dozens of countries worldwide, millions of people participate in volunteer-led Terry Fox Run. Close to $500 million has been raised for cancer research to date. His mom and dad and brother were with me about 3 weeks in Rideau Hall, and they were describing this remarkable journey of Terry and his legacy. $500 million for cancer research, and touching something like 24 countries around the world. This Canadian phenomenon has extended around the world. Every school child in Canada knows about the Marathon of Hope. And in his book, Terry, author Douglas Coupland remarks upon the thousands of names of everyday Canadians in the Terry Fox archives. And he writes, collectively, those names testify to something divine, our nation, our home, and our soul. Terry Fox Run has been important to our family. We have 7 grandchildren, and we have run as a family in the Terry Fox Run almost every year since it began. And 2 years ago, I was running in the Terry Fox Run here in Ottawa, and our now 3-year-old twins were in a stroller. They were then 1+. And their father was pushing them at great speed in the stroller, and their mother, who's a gazelle, was running at great speed, and I was staggering along. And they said, you know, isn't it wonderful? 3 generations in the Terry Fox Run. And then we came to a hill going downhill, and Roger, the gazelle, turned to me and said, Grandpa Book, why don't you push the stroller? I thought, downhill, this is fine, I can just coast. So down I went, feeling very good about myself, 3 generations and so on. We hit the flat land, and then we started coming up the other side. And I was dying. And the 2 little cherubs in the stroller were smiling at me, giggling away. Go, Grandpa Book, you're like a big horse. And I said to them, you do your smiling now, because in a few years our roles will be reversed. Here at home, volunteers are involved in every aspect of our society. Canada has the 2nd largest voluntary sector in the world on a per capita basis, and our social, cultural, and economic well-being is directly linked to the countless donations of time and energy made each day by Canadians. And yet, the circumstances in which we volunteer are evolving and the demands are growing. How will we meet these needs? Since my installation as Governor General, as Ruth indicated, I've been inviting Canadians to join in imagining our country as it could be. We strive for a smart and caring nation where all Canadians can succeed, contribute, and develop their talents to the fullest potential. To achieve this vision, we've set out 3 pillars: supporting families and children, reinforcing learning and innovation, and encouraging philanthropy and volunteerism. I believe that a renewed spirit of philanthropy and volunteerism, of giving, is essential to creating the smarter, more caring nation that we seek. New ideas, innovative thinking will be crucial to our efforts. L'évolution démographique au Canada nous offre.
The demographics evolution in Canada also offer us the new opportunities for mobilization. Energetic and talented retirees are valuable sources of professional insight and experience. Their contributions are essential to the nation we aim to build. We can also look to new Canadians as important contributors to civic life. Their international experience and enthusiasm for Canada can greatly enhance our volunteer potential. It will also be important to find new ways to encourage youth volunteerism. Young people are filled with tremendous energy and idealism, and more than 55% of youth volunteer their time. That's twice the rate of adults. We also know that those who volunteer early in life are more likely to continue. Adult role models are therefore crucial, as demonstrated by the fact that young people who have a parent who volunteers are almost 3 times as likely to volunteer themselves.
For generosity, and in what has been termed a new world of active citizenship, today's volunteers are broadening our idea of altruism. Can we shift our focus so that giving is understood as an act of citizenship, a central act of citizenship, not an activity that we kind of turn off and turn on like a light switch, but something that goes to the very essence of what it means to be a Canadian, to help our neighbors. In a democracy, everyone has something to give. With globalization, many Canadians now direct their energies overseas, helping out in a multitude of noble causes worldwide. As our world changes, so too does the nature of volunteerism. Our challenge is to adapt and always to preserve the spirit of giving. As we approach the 150th anniversary of Canada in 2017, the time is right for us to renew our collective pursuit of kindness. Merci.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for those heartfelt words. And he's a funny guy too, isn't he? I am very pleased to announce that as of today, the Governor-General is now the official patron of Volunteer Canada. Your Excellency, your support is invaluable to us. Thank you. Your obvious passion and commitment to raising awareness of the importance and impact of volunteerism in this country make you the perfect complement to our team. Not only is your patronage warmly welcomed by Volunteer Canada, but also by our nation's volunteers, both at home and abroad, who will view this as a testament to their value to Canadian society and the enrichment of our global community. Many of these volunteers and some of our key voluntary sector partners are in the audience today. Thank you all for coming to celebrate this unique milestone. A special thanks also to Volunteer Ottawa for playing an important role in pulling this event together and for helping us on site today. Your Excellency, we are excited to collectively roll up our sleeves and work with you to ensure Canada continues to be a world leader in volunteerism. To do this, we must keep our finger on the pulse of volunteerism in this country. We must be mindful that volunteerism evolves with our communities and with Canadian citizens. And the fact is, the landscape of volunteerism has changed. We know this from a new pan-Canadian research study commissioned by Volunteer Canada and conducted by Carleton University's Centre for Voluntary Sector Research and Development in collaboration with Decima. Manulife Financial is a partner and the leading corporate sponsor of this project, and I wish to acknowledge them as an outstanding example of a Canadian corporate citizen supporting the role of volunteers in our communities. The research study available for download from our website, volunteer.ca, is called Bridging the Gap, Enriching the Volunteer Experience to Build a Better Future for Our Communities. The study focused on 4 key groups: youth, baby boomers, families, and employer-supported volunteers, and showed us that there are considerable gaps in what Canadians are looking for in a volunteer experience and what, in fact, organizations are offering as volunteer opportunities. Young people told us they are often discriminated against because of their age. And even though they are highly committed, and in many cases more tech-savvy than other generations, many organizations still don't take today's youth seriously or offer them volunteer opportunities with real responsibility. Baby boomers expressed mixed views on what kind of volunteering they want. On one hand, they are highly skilled, driven achievers who have led very structured work, family, and recreational lives. Some want to offer their skills and take on leadership roles, while others want to deal directly with people, try something new, and avoid the pressure of being in charge. Canadian families told us there aren't enough opportunities out there whereby they can volunteer together. They said organizations should shape more activities where family members of different generations and abilities could all participate, allowing the family to spend valuable time together and giving parents the chance to model core values of philanthropy, compassion, and civic responsibility to their children. Employees told us they would be willing to volunteer much more if their workplace gave them the flexibility to participate and offered more opportunities where employees of all levels could work together for one common cause. The bottom line is, if organizations want to attract and keep volunteers at different stages of their lives, they need to modify and adapt the way they do business and recognize that one size does not fit all. Our research findings offered some solutions to organizations to encourage volunteers to come forward, and more importantly, perhaps, to keep them coming back. Sometimes it's simple things. Many Canadians who don't volunteer told us it's because no one ever asked them to. Youth told us they felt a lot of volunteer opportunities weren't appealing to them because they seemed bureaucratic and have too many rules and restrictions. Employer-supported volunteers want more opportunities to offer their skills remotely by helping organizations via email or the internet. Parents said they'd like more information up front to determine if a volunteer activity is appropriate to include children. And baby boomers felt many organizations required a long-term commitment before being accepted, while they preferred shorter-term opportunities and projects that fit their busy schedules. Recognizing the needs of individuals and the unique talents and skills they can bring to an organization will be key to ensuring a more meaningful volunteer experience for Canadians, as well as continuing to expand our nation's volunteer base as we move into the future. 10 years ago, when the United Nations announced International Year of Volunteers, or IYV as it's commonly known, the theme put forth by Volunteer Canada was the value of one, the power of many. As we kick off the 10th anniversary celebration of IYV, I urge you all to continue to believe in the value of one, for it is the ability of one Canadian to give of themselves and make a genuine difference in the life of another that makes volunteering so compelling, so transformative, and a true act of Canadian citizenship. Leaders in volunteering, we urge you to use the insight and knowledge from this latest research to ensure the value of one is recognized for decades to come. In doing so, volunteers of all ages, from coast to coast, can continue to fuel the economic, social, and humanitarian power of Canada. Thank you. I would now like to introduce Nicole Brava, Senior Vice President of Human Resources and Communications at Manulife Canada, to tell you about how Manulife has embraced volunteerism as its signature cause. Nicole's and Manulife's leadership, passion, and dedication to this cause have led to the development of programs aimed at supporting employee volunteer efforts and a successful partnership with Volunteer Canada, which will help build stronger communities by harnessing Canadians' passions and matching their interests and skills with the perfect volunteer opportunity. Nicole.
Thank you, Ruth. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à tous. As Ruth said, I'm Nicole Brava, the Senior Vice President for HR and Communications for Manulife Financial, and it is a real pleasure to be here this afternoon representing Manulife. Manulife est très heureuse.
Manulife is very pleased to have financed this significant survey. You might well ask why a private business such as Manulife would be interested in volunteerism. Allow me to take a few moments to explain.
Manulife is interested in this great cause of volunteerism. Our story begins with 10,000 employees, David being one of them. In fact, our employees volunteer more than 20,000 hours per year in important social causes. Our 50,000 advisors from across Canada who represent Manulife, also are huge contributors to their communities. We were inspired by this commitment from both our employees and our advisors, and as such, have made a huge commitment to volunteerism as our social cause. Nous croyons sincèrement que les bénévoles.
We truly feel that volunteers make a difference in our society, be it in building houses for new communities, working in schools, or to protect the environment. Since Manulife employees and advisors have already given thousands of hours of their time for decades, it seemed quite natural for us as a business to support their volunteer activities.
The hard part was knowing what to do next. So we partnered with the experts, Volunteer Canada. We didn't want to make any assumptions, and we decided that the next best step was to fund a national research, which is what we're unveiling today. So I am proud, Manulife is proud to be part of Bridging the Gap, and proud that it provides the most current, in-depth information about what Canada's volunteers are looking for. Dans le cadre de ce sondage, nous avons
We ask Canadians some personal questions in the surveys, such as, what motivates you to do volunteer work? What do you hope to get out of this experience? And what do you expect of life in general? One thing is sure, we got some very interesting responses. And these responses will guide us in the choice of project we will financially promote. They will help to further strengthen a volunteer network across the country.
This report will more than bridge the gap between volunteers and social agencies. It will start a conversation that has started today between government, not-for-profit, and the corporate sector. We are here today because we all share the same conviction. We believe that volunteers play a crucial role in Canadian society. We believe that they need to be inspired, supported, and engaged. And we believe that it is our responsibility to stand behind them and show our support. So we're excited and honored to be part of this partnership. Nous sommes très heureux et très fiers de collaborer.
We are both very pleased and very proud to be a part of this initiative. Let us all work together to strengthen volunteerism and to help build a better future for all of our Canadian society. Thank you. Merci.
And Manulife is a true leader in volunteerism, of course, but also in the realm of corporate citizenship, where they're seen as an authentic voice of this important initiative. Now the fun part. Each of our panelists is here for this discussion today because they represent core values of volunteers in each of the 4 groups studied in this research report: youth, baby boomers, families, and employer-supported volunteers. I have questions for each of our panelists. Listen to what they say, because afterwards we'll open it up to the floor and you'll have the opportunity to ask your own questions. It's a great chance to delve into the minds and spirits of some exceptional individuals. My first question is for our Governor General. I just know we're going to get a story out of this. Your Excellency, could you please tell us why volunteerism is so important to you personally?
Just hold it up. Well, let me answer the question briefly and then tell a story. Ruth, I can't ever escape telling a story. The most important thing in my life and my wife's life is our children and now our grandchildren. And I guess the most important feature of that is that our children are healthy and have a sense of happiness in themselves. And we have found that that sense of self-confidence has developed in them by virtue of thinking beyond themselves and thinking of others, pure and simple. As it turns out, all 5 of our daughters are in the public service, and I suspect that early sense of helping one's neighbor has caused them not simply to seek careers in the public service, but to know that they get a great deal of inner satisfaction from directing their lives to assist something other than their immediate own goals and objectives. So that, to me, has been a reinforcing experience in volunteerism. The story, let me tell a story. This is one of my favorite Mother Teresa stories, and it has to do with this business of how we move volunteerism from being a kind of frontier, optional, extracurricular activity to a mainstream activity. It has to become part of the culture. Mother Teresa was at a prayer breakfast in Montreal speaking some years ago, and we had a group of 50 or so neighbors that met with her first. And one of our neighbors, lovely person, said, "Mother Teresa, what can I do to help?" And I expected Mother Teresa to say, "Well, you can help my orphanage, my shelter in Calcutta." She said, "Look in your own neighborhood. Look at home. I guarantee you on your street there's someone who needs your love and care." And ended. After her prayer breakfast, there was a number of comments in the newspapers. One was quite critical because it said, you know, this is a marvelous person, but what she does is a drop in a bucket. It's in Calcutta, a city of 25 million people, a third of them in the most abject poverty you can imagine, and she provides shelter for 250 or so in a hostel. It's important, but in the world of need, it's a drop in the bucket. And for a period of weeks, that really troubled me. And then we finished a birthday party in our home. Our children, 5 children in 7 years, so we'd have them in clusters. And at the end of the birthday party, they said, "You know, Dad, you know those ghost stories that you tell the kids? They know they're lies. They don't believe them. They're not really scared at all. Why can't you be like Dean McFarlane? He does magic at birthday parties." And I thought, bloody Andy McFarlane, who was the dean of the School of Journalism, and I was the dean of the School of Law at Western. He's not so smart. I can do what he does. So I went to the next birthday party at the McFarlane house, and there was Andy dressed like a magician. Great big hat, flowing cape, long mustache like this, and he started to do an experiment. He held up a glass of water, and he said, "I will turn this water into wine." You don't believe me, do you? I will. And he twirled around, and he uttered the abracadabra words, and I saw him very surreptitiously dropping 1 drop of red vegetable coloring in the glass so the kids couldn't see. And he flourished it out in front of him, and they saw this coloring suffusing this entire glass of clear water and turning it into the most beautiful hue of rose you can imagine. And I thought, my problem in thinking of Mother Teresa's drop in the ocean was that I was looking at it as a matter of physics, volume, and not looking at it as a matter of chemistry, which was a chemical reaction affecting all of the molecules around. And that, of course, that spirit of generosity, that volunteerism, is what we want to infect or bless every one of us and become a mainstream part of our culture.
I like that, the science of volunteerism. Thank you for those moving words and that great story. My next question is for our youth volunteer, Lynn Lessard. The research found that today's youth know they have much to gain from volunteering, but they also feel they have something to give to organizations, such as expertise with social media. Youth also said they want to be respected and given more responsibility when volunteering. Lynn, what do you think are the key characteristics of today's youth that organizations need to understand in order to encourage young people to make volunteering part of their lifestyle?
Okay, thanks. I'm going to respond in French and English and a bit of Franglish. We'll see how it comes out.
First of all, I think you have to recognize that young people are very enthusiastic. They have a lot of potential. And for all organizations who look actively to recruit youth through schools, there's a lot of ways you can do that. There's placement organizations that do that. But they have a lot to gain from the commitment of young people. First of all, they It's a good experience for youth. It is very worthwhile for them. And it's been proven that if they start volunteering young, they will be volunteers for life. And I think that young people have a very specific advantage. I would say that it's the first time that we have more expertise in a given field than our parents and our supervisors even. I'm talking about the use of new technology and social networking, which has taken such a great place in the world and for our nonprofit organizations.
Organizations really need to be concerned with this use of technology is, of course, because it's an important way of doing advocacy, fundraising, and of recruiting volunteers too. And we know that youth do this best right now, I have to say that. Now, the second thing I wanted to mention is that youth they're not a homogenous group, like any group, of course. And so while we do have a lot of similar skills when it comes to using technology and those types of things, we have different expertises and very different interests. I can tell you that youth, we really have minds of our own. We all have very different interests. We see different causes that are important to us and different ways that we can contribute to those causes. And so it's very important to not make assumptions. I mean, if you think you're going to have youth volunteers just because there's hip-hop music happening at an event, that's not always the case. We really have minds of our own, and we have different interests and different reasons why we volunteer. And so while we're talking about the fact that youth don't feel like they're given enough responsibility, I don't think that's always because organizations don't trust us. I think that it's partly because of that, and it's partly because there's some tasks that they need to have done that don't make you feel like it's very meaningful. Sometimes sort of administrative tasks or folding clothes and things like that, it doesn't feel like you're making a huge contribution, but I do recognize that these need to be done. And so what organizations can do and really should be doing, and I've seen this work very well for many organizations, is combine these tasks with more meaningful things. And the only way to know that is not by making assumptions, but by asking the youth, what is it that you want to contribute to our organization? How do you feel you can best contribute to this organization? And combine that with the tasks that you need done. Let them use their expertise and their interests and make sure that their input is important to your organization and integrate them into the team. Even if they're only there to help fold clothes or do administrative tasks, you can invite volunteers to your meetings and to your events, and it's a very, very important part of feeling like you're an integral part of the team and making sure that you feel like you're making an impact. Sometimes when you're working behind the scenes, it's very hard to feel like you're making an impact. So it's important just to integrate and show some trust and interest in what youth are capable of.
That's great. I think that you made some really excellent points there. Thank you. In particular, I think we all talk the talk around the leadership of young people in the context of technology, but we really do need to pay attention that that's a key asset and skill that many young people bring. And the other piece that resonated with me that you said is our tendency towards homogeneity, and we really do need to look at differences in groups. It's one thing to hive people off into groups, and I think that's important for some broad analysis, but to recognize that it does come down to the individual. So thank you very much. The next question is for Omaima Ferris, our volunteer representing baby boomers. Many of the baby boomers we interviewed said they would find it refreshing to participate in volunteer opportunities where they could do something different than their usual work activities. They also said they would like more opportunities to volunteer remotely via the internet. Omaima, what do you think are some of the ways organizations could make volunteering more satisfying for individuals at this stage of their life?
Hi, I'll speak in English because my Arabic would confuse most of you. And there's not too much French. So I feel what's really important for organizations, and I come to volunteering with two hats. I volunteer myself in the community, and I also work with volunteers from across the Ottawa community in my day job. So what I feel baby boomers are looking for is a way to feel engaged. And often they want to be engaged in something that's not similar to what they do at work. And sometimes the organization isn't really prepared to invest that time initially to listen and get to know the volunteer and look at their short-term and long-term goals. Why are they volunteering? Why are they here? And what would they like to contribute? It's similar to what Lynn said, but even when you're older, you still want to be recognized, you still want to know, you want the organization to know what you can bring forward and what you're good at. And sometimes you do have to mix it in between boring tasks that aren't really that exciting, but the person has the skills for, and things that they really enjoy, and they'll feel they're making the difference. And I find all of that really happens if you listen carefully at that initial interview or that initial stage when you meet the volunteer. If you don't get that part right at the very beginning, it's very difficult to cater to the needs of that volunteer. So I really believe in a volunteer-centered approach towards volunteer work. The organization, of course, the goals of the organization are really important, but if you can't engage those volunteers, those goals of the organization will not be met.
Thank you, Omaima, and it's great for us to, I'm glad you brought in the perspective of the fact that you work with volunteers in your staff role, and so we're really hearing your expertise from both angles of the equation, so that's great. Our next questions are for John and Brooke, our family volunteers. John, the research found that many parents were looking for more opportunities to volunteer as a family so they could spend time together and pass on values to their children. Why did you opt for a volunteer opportunity that involves your whole family instead of something you could participate in on your own?
I would love to sit here and take credit for the fact that I went out looking for an opportunity to volunteer as a family, but quite honestly, it presented itself, and my wife Tracy and I looked at it, and we had discussions with our children, and the place that we live is a place called Wapoos Family Farm, and it affords all 5 of us to give of ourselves in ways that we like to give. And I think a couple of people mentioned in your report mentions people don't want to necessarily do in their volunteerism what they do during the day. I'm a project manager with Export Development Canada. And when I get home, I like to jump on the 50 horsepower tractor, throw the 7-foot wide snowblower on the back, and just crank through that snow drift that everybody else is annoyed with. It's awesome. And the motto at Wapoos is pray, work, and play. And I think the reality is that regardless what you're doing, it can be all 3 of those. Any one thing can be each of those 3 things, as long as your attitude is right. And I think that people who volunteer have their attitude right. So why specifically did we go out and look for Wapoos? I'm not that smart. My wife told me in retrospect that after we had moved there, she said, you know, I'd been looking for something that we could get involved in a family. I'm not that smart. She's the smart one. I follow along, and we all have a good time. So that's why we're there.
So if there's any organizations that need a volunteer snowblower, you can speak with John at the end of the event. Brooke, a lot of people are anxious to hear from you this afternoon. If one of your friends asked you what some of the things that you like most about volunteering with your mom, your dad, your sister, and your brother are, what would you say? How? There we go.
I would probably say that I really like volunteering at Wapoos because I get some hard jobs and some easier jobs, but I get to have a lot of animals, and then I get to have a lot of friends, and I help out by doing the barn animals and stuff, like stuff helping around the farm. And it's sometimes fun, and then it's sometimes hard in the like minus 10 weather when you're going outside at night, try to like crack the ice in the water for the animals. But it can be really fun, and yeah, I'm really happy to be there.
So basically you're telling us you volunteer in a barn. and it's fun. That was great. Thank you, John and Brooke. I'd now like to open the floor to questions for our panelists from the audience. But first, I'd like to introduce you to Jeff Bond and Karen Bakshi from Volunteer Ottawa, who are handling the microphones for us this afternoon. And if you have a question, if you could just raise your hand, and they'll do the talk show thing and run over to you with the microphone.
Okay. Hi there. Can I grab it for a second? Okay. Thank you.
You can let her hold the microphone.
Okay. I'll give it back, I promise. My question is for His Excellency, and I'm wondering if you could perhaps share with us whether there was a particular volunteer who may have made a strong impression on you in your life. Puis en français, Son Excellence, pourriez-vous?
Your Excellency, could you explain or tell us an anecdote about a volunteer who impressed you? Of those, one of my neighbors is Edgar Shans, who's a Mennonite, and our neighbors, the Mennonites, don't use trucks or cars, but they do use a tractor. One day I was on the tractor with Edgar, and I have a rubber on a Band-Aid on my arm. He said, "Did you give blood today?" I said, "Yes, I did." He said, "Do you often do this?" "Yes." "How many times?" "Oh, maybe 100. So it seemed clear to me that he was very interested in giving blood. And he didn't seem to understand why it was important. I said, "Edgar, have you ever given blood?" He said, "Yes." I said, "How many times?" "More than 200. I said, "Edgar, it's not possible. You're only 55. It's impossible to have given blood more than twice a year." He said, "No." He said, "No. Each day in 56. And as of the age of 18, Edgar is a horse and buggy man, and he would get his carriage ready, and he would go 5 miles to Elmira to give blood. And he would go back home. And he would do this. It took 3 hours, but he did that every 5th or 6th day. And it was not for his community. It was for everybody. Every 56th day.
Karen, right here.
This is just a question for Lynn Lessard. Obviously, I could tell from being a youth that many of us are very tech savvy. I was wondering, what are some of the ways that youth can leverage their superior communication skills to help out organizations in reaching out to find more volunteers?
Good question. I'm going to actually direct this, because it's the right audience, I'm going to direct this to those who are working at organizations. Running a social networking campaign on Facebook and Twitter and so on is actually not an easy task. It's very, very time-consuming task, because the whole idea of social networking is instant response. So if you've created a Facebook page for your organization and you're logging in once a week to post a press release, that's not exactly what youth are going to be interested in reading. And so I'm not only encouraging you to engage youth volunteers, but also to hire young people, because they'll be able to engage best in this type of activity and to work best with youth, because you really need to build a large online network to be really successful in this, and you need youth in order to do that. And that will come from youth volunteers who are posting pictures from their activities and letting people know what they're up to. But the important thing about having youth who are working on your social networking campaigns is that they're already online anyway. We're online all day, every day. Even when we say we're studying, we're checking Facebook every 10 minutes. It's our breaks. So we're already there. We can already, we can go and update, your Facebook with interesting things. I'm not saying that press releases are not important. They're very important, but they're not for social networking. And what it's for is it's for pictures and discussions. It's an instant sharing of information. And the best discussions are going to come from youth who are interacting with youth. They'll repost your articles and post questions and have an online discussion. Right there, it's a very interactive way and a very easy way to engage new volunteers and for advocacy and also for fundraising.
That's great. That's very helpful. Thank you. So on the continuum of faux pas, when you're standing at the podium at the one end of the spectrum, might be forgetting to ask the panelist from your corporate supporter his question. So Dave, why do you think companies would or should encourage and support their employees to volunteer?
Thank you. It's very important for me. I grew up in a volunteer role with my parents and kind of at their side volunteering. So, it was important to me when I got into the corporate world to look for opportunities to volunteer. Let's say 20 plus years ago when that happened, there wasn't really a lot of support from the corporation to get involved and be a part of a charity. Back in those days, some of the banks were involved. They would pay financial fees if you were joining an organization. So, there's a little bit of sponsorships there from some of the banks, but not a lot in any of the other corporations, and certainly not with Manulife when I first started with the organization. Since then, in the last probably 5 to 8 years, Manulife has really bought into being a corporate sponsor on a number of different initiatives and really encouraging employees to get involved. Habitat for Humanity, we always build a number of houses in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. And we encourage employees to take the day off and go and work on the house and use skills that we don't normally use sitting at a desk all day or in front of a computer, but use our hands and get involved in that organization. Another one of the opportunities they've just introduced in the last couple of years is what we call Spirit Day. And Spirit Day is where I get to pick the charity that I want to sponsor and help out, take a day off and go work on that charity. So, do all kinds of articles on our internet site within Manulife, hearing about the different things that people do, from working at the food bank to going out and helping different charities. So it's really encouraging to work for a company like this that has really invested and continues to invest in supporting the employees. We also have different ways of getting sponsorship from the company. If we participate in an event or in an organization, they will also financially support that organization if you put in a certain number of hours. If you participate in a run or in another activity where you're raising sponsorship, there's a matching program. So, Manulife's very involved in doing corporate sponsorship. I don't think that corporations need to go quite as involved as what Manulife has. There's always small ways for them to get involved, but there's a real win-win here for the corporation. The personal development that an employee gets, certainly if I go back 20 years ago, when I first got involved in organizations, I was involved with the Kinsmen and Canucks of Canada. And that organization, when I first joined them and then joined Manulife, it gave me an opportunity to stand up and be in front of people and be a leader, working through the different levels of that organization. Got me the opportunity where I could stand up in front of a group where, 25 years ago, there was no way I could stand in front of a group like this and have a conversation and tell them my story. So, and that's a win for the company at the end of the day. Person gets that personal development, costs the company very minimal to get people involved in an organization or participate and volunteer. But at the end of the day, the company hopefully is winning as well. So, I would encourage companies out there to get involved, even in a small way, and help build those skills for their employees.
Ruth, here's an answer to Dave's question that is very simple, but it's quite self-interested, more so than he expressed. One great reason for corporations to be involved in this activity is you attract and keep first-class employees.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. That's right. That's great. Thank you very much, Dave. And Dave said something to me last night that really resonated as well. And he said he was reading the research report, and he could see himself reflected in every single finding in that report in terms of when he volunteered as a young person, when he's volunteered with his family, as a baby boomer, and of course as an employer-supported volunteering. So I thought that was really just a great testament to me that this research is really, you know, a living document. So thank you very much, Dave. Any other questions from the floor? Great, right over here.
Thank you. My name is Mel Massey. I'm a volunteer here at the museum as well as across the street at the YMCA. I'm also a baby boomer. My question is for Omaima. Considering that there are an increasing number of baby boomer immigrants to Canada, and they possess valuable linguistic and cultural skills, which could be of assistance in supporting and integrating new immigrants into Canadian society. Drawing on your experience with volunteers, what would be the best way for volunteer organizations to reach out to these people, to contact them, and to offer them a meaningful volunteer experience? Thank you.
Great question.
Great, thank you. So basically, I feel that looking at what's going on in the nonprofit sector, especially here in Ottawa, and I'm sure it's reflected across Canada, the newcomer population coming to integrate into Canadian society, coming as new immigrants, they are probably the largest group of untapped resources for the voluntary sector. And the way I see it, and I experience it every day, is that newcomers are coming from countries where they may not have heard of volunteering before, or volunteering has a different shape or style based on their religion or their practice in their culture. So formal volunteering, where you have to fill in all these forms, go to an interview, get a police records check, that is a form of volunteering that they may not be familiar with. For the organization, often they're looking for the same old, same old. So the way they recruit, the way they look out for volunteers, they're not really realizing that there's this new group of people that are constantly coming to our door every day, basically. And it really needs some time of reflection on the behalf of the organization, is looking at, are you getting the numbers that you need? And if you're not attracting that group, what are you doing about it? What is the formula that you're practicing? And how attractive are you to a newcomer group? I have a little story about that because this is what I do every day, and as someone active in the Muslim community and also in my job working with newcomers, we're dealing with a group of internationally trained professionals that are newcomers. Most people that come to Canada come with a great deal of education and a lot of energy and enthusiasm to give to their new home. What they're finding is organizations that aren't prepared. And they don't mean to not be prepared, they're just not prepared. They're not aware of new ways to do things. They're not training their staff or their volunteer coordinator to be prepared to deal with new immigrants, even though we've had new immigrants for decades and decades. So what I'm finding is that I had a volunteer that worked for me for about 2 years. She was volunteering. She couldn't work in Canada, but she was internationally trained. She was great in administration, great working with volunteers, and she had worked very closely with me for over a year. She had applied with another organization here in Ottawa, and they had interviewed her for an hour, and there was 3 people in the interview. It was an intense interview, and they were interviewing her for a volunteer coordinator position as a volunteer. So she wasn't going to be paid, and she was very excited because this would be her first place outside of an organization like ours. We work with newcomers, so she felt at home. She wanted to branch out into a mainstream organization. After that 1-hour interview, I got called for a reference for her, and basically what the challenge was is that she had more than the skills they needed, but English was not her first language. And basically what the interviewers who called me, like on a conference call, they're like, do you think she can do the job? And my answer to them, and this is my comment to all organizations, look at the jobs that you have that people can do and that you need volunteers for. Do they all actually need someone whose first language is English? In some cases, yes, and in some cases, not necessarily. So this is how we have to reflect on the positions that we have and how open we are and how ready we are to engage and promote our activities to volunteers that may not be English speaking as their first language. So what ended up happening is they had wanted her to become a volunteer coordinator and also to write and edit and take care of their newsletter. She was very uncomfortable with the newsletter part, but everything else she had done in the time she had spent with me, assisting me in my job. And then when she came back to me, I said, you know, as a volunteer coordinator volunteer, you could have actually managed a volunteer who could have taken care of the newsletter. Plenty of those around who speak English as their first language. And I spoke to the team that was interviewing me about her referencing. And I said, listen, if you're looking for a mainstream English speaker, she's not that. But if you're looking for all the other skills that you've mentioned, she has all of them. And I'm willing to support her as your volunteer coordinator because I've trained her to do what I'm doing. And they were like, okay, I think we can do that. So that's what I mean when you have to reflect and look at the tasks you have and see how can you engage newcomers, especially if English is not their first language. But they're internationally trained and they've got a lot of other skills to offer. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Excellent, excellent response. Yes, back here. Right there, Jeff, in the red, right in front of you.
Good afternoon. My name is Loretta Fleming, and I am the volunteer coordinator at Western Ottawa Community Resource Centre in Canada. And first of all, I'd like to applaud the Governor General for his great initiative in terms of integrating volunteerism into our society. And my question is really more of a challenge to our governments and at all levels to understand that it takes people who are trained to manage volunteer resources, and that we need the resources to be able to engage our community in meaningful volunteer work. There are many new challenges facing the volunteer sector in terms of you know, police records checks, screening, and making sure that volunteers that we have in our organizations can deal effectively with our clients. So, well, I think this is a terrific report, and I, thank the Volunteer Canada and Manulife for doing this. I also would like to propose, another education to our government and to our policymakers that we look for real meaningful resources, financial and training resources to help us engage Canadian society in what we feel is so important to us as a country and to our city. Thank you.
I assure you that question was not a plant from the team at Volunteer Canada. Excellent, excellent point. Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions right here at the front? Or over here first? Okay, we'll get you first and we'll get you right after.
I actually have a question for Brooke.
Okay.
Brooke, do you think you could share with us here what exactly you do in terms of volunteer activities at the farm that help the families that come there?
I help with, sometimes we make slushies and stuff, and I'll help cut the ice and ask what people want and serve them. I've helped with swimming lessons for the little kids once or twice. And when kids want someone to play with but no one else will, I'll just go and play because I love to have fun. So I'll just go, and if someone needs help, if I can help, I will help, and if I can't, I will go get someone who can. So, yeah.
Great. Well done. Okay, who doesn't want to volunteer at Wapoos Family Farm, driving a tractor and making slushies? Yay. Right over here, there was a question. Great, thank you. Yes?
This is more of a comment or thanks as opposed to a question. I'm Lynn Kaplansky. I'm with Girl Guides and the Museum of Nature and various others. And I am not a boomer, I'm before. And on behalf of all of us that are getting tired, thank you for doing this to encourage boomers and the youth to take over what so many of us have been doing for so many years.
Thank you very much for that comment. That's certainly something we hear, that you know, volunteer burnout in that age group is something very significant. And somebody in their 70s in Newfoundland recently said to me, "I'll do anything you want, but just don't ask me to volunteer, because I know if I volunteer to do this, you're going to ask me to do this and do this and do this." So I love that quote. Do we have time for one more question? I think right over here in the second row. Great. Thank you.
This is, again, not a question, but a comment. First of all, I'd like to say that without volunteers, this country would not be able to function. There's no doubt about that in my mind. I'm with the Canadian Tribute to Human Rights, and we're a volunteer board of directors. And recently we had to replace a recording secretary and a treasurer. So I approached the Volunteer Ottawa board, and within 2 days, those positions were filled. And I could have filled 4 or 5 times. And much to my surprise, they were all young people who were either in university or who had just finished university, who had part-time jobs, and still they're volunteering their time to do what we needed them to do. And I'm exceedingly impressed with the youth. I expected them to be response coming from someone who had retired and wanted to have a few things to do in their off time, but that wasn't the case at all. So I'm learning to deal with youth, and they're getting us onto Facebook, and the enthusiasm is quite extraordinary, and also their capabilities. So I'm very happy to be able to report that it's been a great success.
That's great. Excellent. And actually, we know that the biggest growing group of Facebook users are over the age of 55, so there you go. I think we have time for one more question. Is there another one, or? Okay. Well, thank you to all of our panelists and to you participating from the floor and sharing your personal experiences and contributing to such a stimulating discussion on volunteerism today. We hope you will take some time to read the Bridging the Gap research report, again, available online at volunteer.ca. And I'd also encourage you to check back regularly. Throughout this entire year, Volunteer Canada will be releasing more detailed information on each of the demographic groups examined in the research, and also releasing some tools to support volunteer involvement. In closing, I need to make a few acknowledgements in order to thank those who helped make today happen. I need to thank, of course, Maureen Dugan and the team at the Canadian Museum of Nature, who have turned this into a great event for us today. Huge recognition to our partner, Volunteer Ottawa, for their role in making this happen. I'd like to thank my colleagues at Manulife Financial, Geronimo de Miguel, Martha Turdick, and Nicole Brava. Just thrilled to work with them and to have them here today and share in this launch of our partnership. I have to say an enormous thanks to the entire team at Volunteer Canada, who have put enormous effort into bringing this event together, with a special mention going to Katie McNulty, Kate Brownlee, Shannon Harvey, and Graham McCatchick. We just wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. And finally, thank you to Your Excellency for participating so openly in this discussion and for becoming a patron of Volunteer Canada. Your personal support of volunteering sets an example for all Canadians, encouraging those who volunteer to continue to do so and to find meaningful ways to participate in Canadian society. For those who have yet to volunteer, your patronage advances this important foundation of Canadian culture and will remind each of us that we have something to offer. Now, Your Excellency, if you could please join me up here. May I present to you a token of our mutual commitment to volunteerism, a Heart of Volunteering pin. It is a stylized heart that reflects the generosity of the human spirit, with an extended arm pointed upward to illustrate that the difference volunteers make in this world is unlimited, reaching for the sky, making dreams happen. This pin is a uniquely Canadian symbol, proudly worn by volunteers in every region of the country and by leaders in the voluntary sector who support the work of volunteers. Thank you, Your Excellency, for helping Canadian volunteers make our nation's dreams a reality.
Thank you.
I get to put this on you. I want to get a picture of us. Thank you. Thank you very much. And of course, thank you to all of you for being here today and for everything you do and everything you give every day. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.